All right, everybody, welcome to another Masters of Marketing. We've got a super exciting show today. Panel and guests, we have Deirdre Breakenridge. She is the CEO of Pure Performance Communication, and today she's going to be talking about a feel approach in communication because it matters. Deirdre, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So I would love to hear about your stories. You're a 30-year veteran in the PR space, and I'd love to hear about everything that's going on with you in these times and what you recommend in the terms of PR and communication.
Awesome. So I'm just going to dive right in, take you on a little journey to feel in your communications. And just to let you know a little bit about myself. So this 30 years has always been framed with strategic marketing and PR. So we all know we're putting together these great PR marketing programs. We're doing it through our research and understanding messaging and get the right content and what's going to resonate because it goes through the right channels, and then we're measuring. And, here I am counseling for years. I'm writing books on the topic. I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor. And all of a sudden, there is this seismic shift in my world because our family experienced the unthinkable and unimaginable when my 24-year-old stepdaughter chose to end her journey. And she left this world. And when something like that happens, first of all, it's absolutely heartbreaking, but it makes you stop in your tracks and you really take a look at your life and what you're all about and your work. And that's what I did. And my journey forward meant I needed questions answered. So being that my stepdaughter was 24 years old, I decided to go on a research journey and ask as many millennials as I could about how they showed up to their conversations, how they wanted to be perceived, what they valued, how they built their relationships, what trust meant, and what specifically they wanted to hear from the leaders and the people that they looked up to. And it's really interesting because I thought I would have these 10-minute conversations. Well, it turned into one-on-one research, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. The stories were mind-blowing in a lot of cases, what was being shared. And what I noticed after 75, 100 interviews, and I started taking down all of this data, that they were building a model because millennials, and remember, millennials will make up, I think it is about 75% of the workforce by 2025. They were building this model. And what they were asking for was for the people around them, when they interact and when they communicate, to face fears, right? Step out of your comfort zone, to sort of put your ego aside and to be more open and inclusive. And they were asking for understanding and empathy and emotional intelligence. And they were also asking for ethics and good judgment. And they were asking for love and for passion. So I don't know if you noticed, but that spells a very significant word in my world right now, and hopefully will become an important word in yours as well. Feel. And it's to feel first in your communications. And, the stories were really interesting because feel is a touchy-feely word. And I grew up in the world of business. I got my MBA, and there was no class on feel. And, in my world as an agency owner, and then I became a consultant, feel was often minimized, thus the strategic communications. So from all of the stories and from this model, it's not that you don't want to be strategic in your communication. The model actually says, be strategic, do all of the work. And at that point of passion potential, you're strategic if you have a reason to connect. If what you're sharing meets the market and there's passion, at that point, if you add a feel lens, then you will have that much deeper of a relationship. Move from your one-off connections and your transactions to something that's real and genuine, loyal, and that's where you build advocacy. So if you audit and you find out that you actually have a reason to connect and you start to build feel, how do you know you actually feel? Well, we built a test. So I say to all of the marketers and the business professionals out there, if you want to know how much you feel and then apply that through your communications, because that's what actually builds the better relationship, take the test, feelfirsttest.com. It's 32 questions. It evaluates you and scores you in every level of feel. Do you face your fears? Do you engage with empathy? Do you live with ethics and good judgment? And do you unleash the love? And the test recommends exercises so you can up your level of feel. And then when you learn that you feel or you don't feel, you work on it and you can extend that through your channels. You feel through social media. Can you imagine if we start to feel on social media, how many less knee-jerk reactions we would have, and maybe conversations wouldn't be as polarized and we would question more and open up the discussion. Maybe if you were to feel in your media interviews, if you were to feel in your presentations, whether it's on Zoom or you're on stage, or feel in your one-on-one interviews. And then you measure how well you do in your relationships and if you're really building those unbreakable bonds. So you might be saying, well, this is all about millennials. Okay, 52-week study, just millennials. You could look at it that way, but look at the size of the workforce, look at the buying power of millennials, look at Gen Z, who's entering into the workforce on the heels of millennials. They have similar aspirations and aspects of their characters, so they feel. And then think about the way companies are automated, marketing automation, artificial intelligence. What do we have over the robots and artificial intelligence? Our ability to feel. What do we have? The ability to be compassionate, to build trust in a relationship, to show passion. The robot doesn't always have this. So when you think about the way that you're connecting and how you feel, we know that emotional intelligence means you have to have a handle on your own feelings first before you can manage anybody else. So I say to you, if you can feel first in your communication, you will be put on the path to a deeper relationship and to use a feel lens over all of your strategic communications. And I think I'll stop there just to see if you have any questions.
Oh, that's amazing. So, I mean, there's like so much to dive in here. This is a call, like this thing is a callback to a presenter we had a couple weeks ago. He was the head executive creative director of Adobe, and a lot of the stuff that you're saying is almost like completely in line with it.
Really? That's
Yeah,
really good to know that a brand like Adobe
yeah,
is speaking this way. That makes me
yeah.
very happy.
So what he said was that from scientific research, if you have an emotion, either positive or negative, tagged with a memory, that memory sticks with somebody a lot longer, right? And so he was talking about the science of negative emotions and positive emotions, and how brands need to have positive emotions attached and associated with every single one of their interactions, because that's what gets you first. And then it gives you the ability to have the time for the logical brain to kind of like reason through it. Because if you just hit somebody with logic right off the bat, it's not going to impact their memory as much.
I agree.
And this gentleman wrote a book, Adam Morgan, awesome speaker. And you should, like, it's directly in line with what you're talking about. My problem with this, okay, is, and the kind of the strategy is that empathy takes time, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of thought, and it's a big trade-off between, hey, is this just a task that I want to check off the list, or what's the ROI in it? So I'm a small business owner, and I get it, and if I wanted really one-on-one communication, you would take a one-on-one sales approach. You would really get to know your potential client. You would really, really understand them, and then talk to that individual persona and that individual person with what they resonate with. At marketing, like you said, in marketing automation and AI, we try to do this at scale. And what I'm concerned with this approach is that I could see this working for really, really high value items. Let's say I'm buying a house or I'm buying a company, right? Something like where there's huge profit margins and the relationship 100% matters. From my vantage point, I feel like the idea of brand is about trying to abstract that so people will not need that one-to-one relationship, and they'll have like that relationship with that brand versus really having to have a single one-to-one relationship all the time. So the question in this is how, like, yes, empathy is amazing, but who's got time for that? And and how do you handle that trade-off, or how do you justify that trade-off?
So, of course, I'm going to say that you have to find time for empathy. Yes, it is a process, but in order to build trust, right, you have to have some kind of understanding in a relationship. So we can always, I will say this, we can always have those one-off, you can sell, make a sale, maybe you'll get a customer back. That's all well and good. This is premised on, yes, it is about a brand, but brands are made up of people, and we can't ever forget that. And what you invest in those people, that's what's going to be taken to the outside. So it's almost like with this particular model, it really has to start with your people on the inside. And we know that happy people on the inside create the momentum and the excitement and the passion and the love of their own brands to be able to communicate that out. And even in a time of a global pandemic, it's the brands that are seen as being good to their employees or good to their customers. They're the ones that are the winners when all is said and done. People want to do business with the brands that they like, the brands that come across with the positive. When you talk about the emotions, that's a really important point that you made, because it is just as easy to have a negative emotion tied to a brand to become contagious as it is to have a positive emotion. And I think that's where we have to focus, that you can have contagious positive emotion and propel your brand forward. So empathy doesn't have to be, you're going to be so one side of a scale or the other. It's the steps literally to get there. And I think what I'm saying is that as much as you're selling, as much as you're building your relationships, wherever you are at that point, if you add this layer of feel, however you are connecting, it is going to take you to a better place. You might say, why? Because it can't hurt. It can always, always help.
So it sounds like a feel is more applied to the internal communications of running a marketing consultancy or an agency like you've been part of than the external communications, but it will spill over to the external communication. In your experience running a consultancy, being part of an agency, are there specific examples of weekly meetings you set up or one-on-ones you set up, or things that will trigger the use of this communication over and over again?
Right. So definitely weekly meetings, one-on-one, understanding that there is a safe place within the organization that you can actually share with your colleagues, with your coworkers. I'm just going to give you, and it will spill over, and they have to understand how to handle things on social media as well, because everybody is communicating. Let me give you the internal example. One of the millennials in my study, she shared a story that was actually pretty heartbreaking. She talked about how she was on a team with 5 people and she was given a project. And they all, by the supervisor, they all had a piece of the project, and they had 7 days, 1 week, to work on their parts, come back to the table together, and they were going to present to the supervisor, who would then take it to the leaders of the company. So this young woman, she's been at this company for over 3 years. She's working on her project. 3 days into it, she starts to feel a little bit overwhelmed. Then she starts getting anxious. Well, she ends up with a full-blown panic attack. And she doesn't know what it is. She's never had a panic attack before. Her boyfriend doesn't know. So he ends up taking her to the hospital. She stays in the hospital for the whole weekend. On Monday, she scrambles to put together what she had of the project, and she gives it to her team, and she presents it to the supervisor, knowing that it was subpar, because she'd rather do that than let anybody know that she had health challenges that weekend, because she felt like, number one, nobody would care and it would not be met with kindness. So that's an example of, if you don't set up that safe place, if you don't set up the type of channel and communication and the ability for people to be able to say, in such an extreme example, how they feel, that's not going to work out well for your company. You're going to lose some of the best of your talent. So that is one example.
So questions on, with politics, with power dynamics, how do you, as the person who needs that system to exist, rather than the person at the top of the hierarchy who doesn't need the system because they're already at the top of the hierarchy, how do you channel that system into place?
So I think if you want to hit the politics, anything that, when something is challenged, it's the approach, right? And how you do it. And if, whether you're out on social media and it's politics, or it's internal in your organization, what ends up happening when people feel threatened by a conversation, they shut down and you go to an opposite corner. And what has to start happening in our organizations, and what people should get used to, is being able just to ask why. It's okay to have a different opinion. And rather than having an ego, just to step back and say, tell me more. How did you come to that conclusion? What does this mean? Help me to understand. As you do that, people tend to relax and they will share more. That's feel. That increases your chances. That's the face your fears and the open and the inclusiveness, because we know diverse perspective leads to innovation. But if you shut that down right at the onset, you're never going to have a chance to get to that next step. So I think it is a matter of, no matter who you are in the organization, I do believe it does start with leaders being more open and vulnerable, because when they can do that, it allows people to ask those questions.
So there's a great example of the Alcoa aluminum or steel factory, where people wanted to give feedback, but they were afraid to give feedback. And a new CEO came into place and said, we're going to improve the safety of every single one of our mills. And then, as everything was, around this idea of safety, people had no problem giving feedback because it was for the safety of the greater good. It wasn't just something that they noticed that they were stepping on someone else's toes, or, they were just trying to protect themselves. And because of that, communication flourished. There was great improvements. Is there anything that you see in a lot of companies that's kind of a similar analogy, where not just asking for everyone to give feedback, but asking for people to give feedback tied to a specific metric that they're improving, would jumpstart this in a way that is easiest for people to digest?
Yeah, so that's a great example with Alcoa. I think what I found out from a lot of the millennials that I spoke to is that they do have a lot of opinions, and they have a lot of opinions that they want to share, except it's not being met with what Alcoa did in opening up the discussion around, doing something that shows we are being safe and we want you to weigh in. So I think if we were to look at millennials and some of the comments that they made, it's, why do we have to wait until we are recognized, or we're 3 years in our career, or we have to stay in our lane until we're allowed to come to the table? Something as simple as a survey, a company-wide survey, just talking about the brand and the brand experience, is eye-opening in and of itself. And this is very, very broad, but I don't know how many companies, when they're developing their brands out of their marketing department, take into consideration all the people internally who touch that brand. It's not just the marketing folks who come up with, how the brand is going to look and how it's going to feel. And the PR people chime in with, well, there's a tone of voice and a certain style and communication. But really opening that up, that alone says, We care. We want to hear from you. We want you to be invested, and we're going to take you along for the ride.
Do you have an example of a company that's run a survey like that and some of the outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with companies in different respects. I've worked with nonprofit organizations who have run that survey when it came to what do you think of social media and how do you want to be involved in our social media program. We're rolling our brand out, and this goes back a few years. We're rolling our brand out on social media. Tell us what you've experienced so that we can put the best experience forward through our channels. And then it's not just getting the survey and taking the information. It's then saying, wow, this is what people are saying and what they love and what we should be sharing. Now it's time to bring them in and also talk about the training of the social media and to have them involved in building the playbook and make them feel invested in the whole effort. And that's just one more step to get them vested in what you're doing.
Yeah, this sounds like a lot of the stuff that you do in really high-end like sales training, right? So if you took a like sales training, it's like, hey, be emotionally available, speak, sometimes it's called like transaction analysis, be adult to adult. Maybe in a brainstorming session, you may want to like kind of like change your mode, but a lot of times you're really trying to listen to the problems of your customer and your client and really high-end sales. What this feels like to me is that we're kind of changing that role where you take some of the strategies when you're listening to the emotional capacity of your client and understanding their problems and their kind of tensions and where they're at. You need to turn that internally to your own organization so that they can then in turn be empowered to turn that externally to your clients.
Yeah.
So
that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
That's how it's exactly that, because the salesperson who, and granted, everybody has their strengths. Everybody has their ways of connecting and making a meaningful relationship. But this particular point that you said about the listening and keying into the pain points, if you can train everybody to be able to, number one, I don't know how many of us are listening clearly with so much going on in our own organizations, with our phones pinging, our smartwatches going off. That's a lot of technology. That's way too much. So even within our own organizations, we go into a meeting or we're on Zoom together, and it's kind of like, is anybody really listening? So technology is an issue. We have to understand that we can listen, but are we actively listening? So that's step number one. But I also think and whether you're a salesperson, a marketer, a PR person, or wherever you are in the company, the different levels of empathy. Because I think that a lot of us say, I'm empathetic.
I'm not.
Well, okay, well, that's good. At least you realize that.
I'm good at it.
But to say that you're empathetic, what level of empathy are you actually operating on? Is it a cognitive level? Is it emotional level? Is it a compassionate level? Now, with the three levels, it builds trust and it makes you go deeper into the relationship. So you can be on social media. I'm going to use an external example because I think people can really relate to this. You're on social media and your customer is having a bit of a hard time on Facebook and they are complaining. You realize this. You don't exactly know the full situation, but you know enough to say, oh, something's going on. You then change your tweet or your Facebook post, your tone, because you want to make sure that they realize that you have heard them, and that's cognitive empathy. You've now connected on some kind of empathetic level. You move them over into private messenger, or you're on Twitter and you move over to a DM, and you're letting them share more of what's going on. You're mirroring back their words to them, saying, I've heard you. Now your emotional empathy. They really trust you and they're going to share a lot more. At which point you're either going to be able to give them a plan of action of how you're going to fix this, or how they're going to fix it, or you're going to do it together, or you're going to get them to somebody who fixes it. Now you're at a level of compassionate empathy because you've moved into an action plan to help them. So I say to everybody, are you empathetic, and on what level? And if we can all think and train that way and take that out through our channels, well, we might get along a lot better. We might help a lot more people.
That's awesome. Yes, I completely agree. One more thing that like kind of like we're kind of running out of time here, but I wanted to ask a question before we went into our closing questions. Why do you think, in a minute or two response, that this we need this for millennials now, and it maybe wasn't needed as before to kind of bring people into the corporate shield or get them on board, right? What do you think has changed?
So I think it's a generational thing. It's a gap. I do think it was needed before, actually. I would never have said this as a Gen X on the cusp of boomer, but being in business in the late 80s into the 1990s, you just sort of had this attitude like you're going to pay your dues and you're going to suck it up, buttercup, and you're going to do what you have to do. And it's really the millennials who have become more vocal and who have shown a different way. They don't live to work. They work to live. It's a different mindset. And I think that because there will be 5 generations in the workplace, we all have to understand one another, and feel is going to be a way to connect those generations. And if we can connect that way, it's going to translate on the outside through our channels, and it's going to make a difference in all of our relationships with our constituents.
Interesting.
I hope that made sense.
It does make sense. I completely, like, I don't know if I am a millennial, maybe, but I totally see what you're talking about also, just with the freedom to move around, go around the world, technology, like people are doing their jobs so they can get out there and try a new experience. And with many more opportunities, like they do congregate to the places that treat them better and have better communication, unless they are trying to do one specific thing with their life and there's only one opportunity to be an astronaut or work at an investment bank or something like that.
Exactly. So, and they want to be met with passion. A lot of people say millennials that, they're, and this is quoting somebody else, oh, millennials are lazy, millennials are entitled. No, they want to be met with the same kind of passion that they have. Ignite that passion goes a long way.
For sure. With 2 minutes left, we have 3 closing questions we always ask. And I'm just going to ask them all. You can answer them in whatever order you want.
Okay.
The first one is, where do you go to stay ahead of the curve on feel what you're teaching, emotional intelligence, the other things that you're passionate about? The second one is, where can people get in touch with you online? And the third one is, and I think we might have already gone over this, but what's an example of where this was applied, where you thought it would work really well and it didn't, or you didn't think it was going to work and it just took off? You can choose either one.
Okay. So the first one is, where do I go ahead to stay, or where do I go to stay ahead of the curve? I do a lot of meditation. So I actually have to calm myself down to be able to pick up on the energy and my emotional intelligence so that I can learn from others. I also tend to read a lot of books around emotional intelligence, energy, and mindset. This really, really helps me. To get in touch with me, I'm at Dee Breakenridge on Twitter. You can always find me there, or you can email me, Deirdre at pureperformancecom with 2 M's.com. And an example would be, I use the FEEL model in media training. And it's interesting because I actually worked with one executive who went from getting different media hits, now this is pre-COVID, to becoming a contributor, a regular contributor on a TV news program where she would frequently go to the mall to be a part of this show. And because I believe that FEEL can deepen any relationship, and we use the FEEL model to have her connect more deeply with this NBC station, and it worked pre-COVID.
nuts. It'll work again. We'll get there.
Yes, she'll be back. She'll be back at the mall or in the studio. I'm sure of it.
For sure. Deirdre, thank you. This has been a great presentation, great model examples to go along with it. I think you handle a lot of our objections quite well. And I hope people reach out if they want to learn more. And thank you so much for coming to Masters of Marketing. Thanks for everyone attending, and we'll see you tomorrow.